So, my Bridgerton videos, whilst we wait for season 4, which hopefully, fingers crossed, will be finger licking good, often originate from two sources. Either it's a thought I've been chewing on for a while, running my teeth around its edges, trying to figure out the core of what I want to say, or if it actually needs saying in the first place. Please know that this is often not only limited to Bridgerton videos, it cuts across the videos I make about other shows as well. The second source often is from throwaway lines I read where people say things that have me cocking my head with a, that doesn't make any sense, which then often sends me down a spiral of considering their points and if I find any validity in it because it's the internet. We're all entitled to our opinions. As much as I might disagree, they are saying what they perceive to be true on their platform. And so I often decide to make a video sharing my thoughts on the matter on my platform. Unless, of course, it is misinformation or disinformation about actual real life people or events that can cause harm, at which point I'm going in guns blazing. All of which to say that I saw a comment where someone was trying to equate Simon's lying and, in their own words, taking advantage of Daphne and her naivety as being justifiable cause for Daphne's assault in the latter part of the season. And I would like to talk about that. Why we lie, why our lies can be justified, and why, even if it isn't, it is a very slippery slope we're getting on when we try to give excuses for assault. Now, before I get into the weeds of the video, I would like to state upfront that I do agree that Simon took advantage of Daphne's naivety. Like I mentioned in an earlier video about whether or not the Bridgerton mamas failed their daughters in regards to the sex talk during their marriage and what it would entail, using the characters of Violet Bridgerton and Portia Featherington to buttress my point. Like I said in that video, they were working with the limitations of the time in which they lived. And their daughter's naivety was important. I will leave the link to that video in the description bar for those who haven't seen it yet and would like to watch that after seeing this one. But as I was saying, I do agree that Simon took advantage of Daphne's naivety. His plans as they were executed banked on Daphne not knowing any better. And he worked with that in order to achieve his goal. That is the root of why she was so upset. It's not just that he lied, but that he took her for a fool and was able to benefit from her ignorance. Her pride hurt, her head hurt, and so she lashed out. I am not trying to justify Daphne's actions whatsoever. Like I stated earlier in this video, we walk a slippery slope when we start to give excuses for why assault could potentially be justified. However, these are fictional characters, and as such, we are able to examine them from all sides and sit with their motivations even as we observe their character arc and growth. Although, to be fair, of all the female leads we've gotten so far, Daphne is the one with the least amount of growth, but that's just me. You can disagree with that statement if you want. But as I was saying, Daphne's pride was hurt, and as was her heart. And so she lashed out. It was a progression where she felt her power had been stripped from her and was desperate to gain it back, and thus did something that a ton of viewers, myself inclusive, found egregious. She did it in the books, and the show still chose to adapt it to screen because the core of what Daphne wanted to achieve, the horrifying nature of it, which was born from a place of perceived helplessness, needed to be maintained. I understood the why of it, of why they went with that choice, even as it pissed me off. But we're not here to talk only about Daphne. The title clearly is also referring to Simon and his lie, and the eternal question of, was he right to do so? Now, I'm certain a lot of you can glean from reading between my words, and also if you've spent any amount of time on my channel, you can probably guess my stance on this. Yes, I do not fault him for lying at all. I personally am of the opinion that he was right to do so, justified even. Because to judge Simon based off of his lie, we have to ask the important question of, why do we lie? Because here is the thing, people lie for different reasons. Some to cause harm, yes. Some to shirk responsibility, yes. Some to fit in, to belong to a group that would otherwise ostracize them for the truth, yes. And then there are the lies we tell for self-preservation. The lies we tell to keep things to ourselves, to keep our hurt and pain and anger and shame buried and private. Now, before you run to type the comments, yes, I am aware that there is an imbalance of power in Simon and Daphne's relationship by virtue of the fact that he is a man and he is a duke. And so, therefore, the cost of Daphne going along with what he had wanted, which was to not marry her, hell, he was prepared to die by her brother's hand as punishment for him having taken liberties with her. The cost to Daphne, who is a young woman recently out to society, would have been astronomical compared to Simon. I am not arguing with that, and I understand why Daphne was desperate to ensure that not only did she put a stop to the duel, but that she got Simon to agree to marry her in order to protect her reputation, what with Cressida in the wings waiting to cause an enormous amount of damage. I understand why Daphne in that moment was willing to agree to anything as long as it meant that she got to marry Simon. But I also understood why Simon lied in that moment. Now, I've seen some people say that, well, technically he didn't lie. He said he cannot give her children, which if we look at the semantics of it, he was kind of telling the truth in that he is making the very active choice to not give Daphne children, not that he is unable to father a child. Of course, this is where he's taking advantage of Daphne's naivety comes in, because he is very well aware of how she would interpret his words and the actions that followed, where he was actively employing the pull-out method so that he can keep his son oath to his father. His plan was to keep Daphne in the dark indefinitely for as long as he possibly can. Of course, we all know that that didn't work out as well. But the one thing that I think a lot of people tend to gloss over when we talk about Simon's actions in the season with regards his lie is the fact that Daphne was not entitled to his truth, at least at the point when the story demanded it of him. Now, hear me out. I know they've been communicating. We see through the course of the season, which ideally runs from, like, say, January to the middle of the year. So in the space of those 6 months, less than 6 months actually, because their ball, the one that was held at the end of Bridgerton season 1 by the Duke and Duchess, was meant to wrap up the London season. And we see throughout the course of said London season, the earlier part of it, that Daphne and Simon were becoming really good friends. He was starting to tell her things about his life and vice versa. And there were moments of connections where he brought up his mother and her love for art and the vulnerability tied to it and Daphne's interpretation of said art. But they hadn't reached the part where he could tell her about the abuse he had suffered at the hands of his father and how that made him hate the man and the title that came with him, to the point of not wanting to have anything to do with either, which is what led to the decision to end the Hastings line permanently. But that would be considered a very radical choice. And I think because we got swept up in the moment, a lot of us forgot that Simon has barely known her for 6 months tops. Like he tells Queen Charlotte, his first impression of her was that she was barely out of leading strings. This was her first season in society. How is he meant to think about bringing it up? Why should he bring it up? In what capacity would she understand? Would anyone understand really? Theirs is a society that prides itself on titles and established lines and households and the prestige that comes with it. Simon's decision to willfully end his line is not something that he can just bring up in normal everyday conversation. It's not something that men of nobility willfully did. None of them would understand his choice. Hell, even Lady Danbury, the woman who raised him like he was her own son, the woman to whom he concedes everything because of how much she loves him and he loves her, even Lady Danbury has no ideas about his decision or his plans. Because everyone's instinctual reaction, were they to learn the truth, would be to push him to change his mind, to point out how what he's planning simply isn't done, isn't the right way to do things. He knows that instinctively that would be their reaction, and he doesn't want a part of that, because none of them would really be able to see the core of why he is so desperate to walk that path. That would require vulnerability he is not willing to share. And so to him, navigating that conversation with a sheltered Daphne wouldn't have really yielded much. So the lie was to discourage her and a shorthand to let her know that he can't give her what she wants as he isn't the man she thinks he is. He went through with the wedding because he loves her and because he feels guilty towards her and is resigned to a life where she would eventually grow to loathe him should she find out the truth. I mean, a lot of that skipped over our heads and probably Simon's as well when they had the "I burned for you" confession scene and he realizes that she wants him just as much. But physical attraction is just one part of their relationship, and for Simon to be truly vulnerable, they need to go beyond that. And the funniest thing is, within the show, they never actually do that. He shuts her out the minute she finds out the truth and attempts to force him to father a child with her. And the only way she was able to truly grasp at his scars and his hurt and his pain, which is the reason why he lied in the first place, was by reading very personal and private letters he had sent to his father. Like, the show just glosses over that clear violation of his privacy by waving a magic wand so that everything would be a-okay, but we aren't going to forget how we arrived at that happy ending. Because like I said earlier, Simon lying to Daphne was to keep his secret, to maintain his anger at the man who hurt him and abandoned him and treated him as disposable. All that feeling and all that rage was born from the part of him that wanted to be loved and accepted by his father and got nothing but rejection instead. It was a very personal decision that would have meant unearthing a can of worms were he to tell Daphne the truth. And so Daphne stumbles on it by doing the thing she's always done, by having zero respect for his boundaries and reading what ideally should have been very personal and private letters. Now, if this were real life, that would have been even more cause for them to get into a bigger fight. Again, because reading my personal letters that I haven't given you permission to touch, not to even think of reading them, is a fighting offense. But it exists to serve the role of highlighting Simon's hurt and pain and shame and laying them bare before Daphne so she can understand why he felt the need to lie, what the lie was trying to protect, and what was at the core of his pain. And it is in speaking to said pain that she's able to help kickstart his healing process by leaving the cloud that is his father permanently in their past. It is a very convenient way to resolve their conflict, and I agree that I did go along with it when I watched the show. However, I did then and still do believe quite strongly in the fact that Simon is allowed to want to keep his secrets and that the lies we tell in order to keep our personal truths a secret are justified. As long as they are not actively causing harm, of course, and we eventually tell someone the truth when they've earned it. But then again, that's just me and my thoughts. I would as always love to hear yours. Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Please let me know in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you can't, however, do consider checking out my other channels. One is my gaming channel and the other holds my ASMR content. I do have both of them linked in the description bar if they sound like something you might be interested in. Whichever the case may be, however, I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.